Today's agenda is, we're going to get an overview of the Math Instructional Practice Guide, which is, of course, the IPG. And we're going to talk about some supports for implementing that as well. All right, so first today, we're going to talk about the purpose and the use of the Instructional Practice Guides, or the IPGs. Tools like the IPG are very valuable in one of the main ways they're very valuable is that we always want to build a culture of continuous learning for all educators, no matter what role you hold. We know that whenever we continue to learn about better ways that students learn and analyze data for what's effective, we can help our students grow. So the instructional practice guides define the vision for strong math instruction. Although it's typically used in core construction, the indicators are important for any type of instruction that students receive, even if they're receiving instruction in other settings. So strong core instruction is inclusive of all learners. That means it not only gives all students access to grade level content, but it also leverages high quality instructional materials in a way that provides access points to support all learners' engagement in grade level instruction. So why a math instructional practice guide? So if you recall in one of your earlier sessions in the fall, you were introduced to two IPG tools. One was for foundational skills in ELA. That one is used for grades pre-K through second grade. And the other is for building knowledge in ELA. That one's used for pre-K through 12. Today, we're going to give you an overview of the Tennessee Instructional Practice Guide for mathematics. There's only one IPG for math, and it can be used for across all of the grades, kindergarten through 12. So it's important to use the IPG in various ways, norming on what strong instructional practices look like and sound like. When we norm on those expectations, it allows us to use the IPG as a tool during learning walks and to have high quality discussions on the instruction that we viewed, focusing on strengths and areas of growth to drive towards continuous improvement. The information that we glean from learning walks using the IPG can also provide the teacher with quality feedback for next steps to improve instruction and positive feedback for what to continue. So although the math tool, the math IPG, is just a little different than some of the others that you have, each IPG mirrors one another in focus. That is, they all have the culture of learning, the use of high quality instructional materials, teacher actions, and student actions. So I believe you all have access to the Math IPG. If not, just let us know and we can drop it in the chat if you need it. Today, we're just going to orient you to the Tennessee Math IPG. And we're going to talk about high-level indicators for effective math instruction. We're not going to go through every single indicator in detail. However, as the purpose for this session today is not to norm you on the tool, but just to give you a general sense of what strong math instruction looks like so that you can develop your own vision for excellent instruction and support. So before we start diving in, I'd like to take a poll real quick. How familiar are you with using the Math IPG? You have 4 choices here, A, B, C, and D. So A would be hardly familiar at all. And then all the way to the other end of that spectrum is D, well-versed and practiced. So if you would, if you don't mind, just drop your answer to that question. All right. So if anyone would like to come off mute and just kind of share what your experience has been with using the Math IPG, I would really appreciate some of the context.
I don't mind speaking. My name
Excellent.
is Jonathan Franklin. I'm at Elkton School in Elkton, Tennessee. Monica, you've actually been in my classroom a couple of years ago.
Yes, I have. I
And
recognized your voice immediately.
and Monica, you helped me out a lot. And then when they switched over to the math IPGs, it really went along with what you said. And so this is my third year being the assistant principal. Um,
Excellent.
And we actually have our math walkthroughs at the end of this month. So I will be going through with this. But with the math IPGs, you're going in and you're looking at what the math teachers are actually teaching, and you're making sure that the content that the math teachers are using is actually with the standards that are presented. Um, and you're just basically you're helping out the teachers. You're making sure that the students are engaged and that they're paying attention. You're also making sure that the teachers are knowledgeable about what they are teaching to the students, and you're also making sure that we're not using any shortcuts. I know we all used to do, as a former math teacher, we always did the keep, change, flip.
Yeah.
And instead of just saying keep, change, flip, you actually have to dig in deeper and explain why keep, change, flip really works. And so you just can't give the kids the little tricks and tools, but you actually have to explain what it is that's going on and why this works. So it gives them a deeper knowledge and a deeper understanding of why these things work.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that out, Jonathan. It's so good to see you, and I'm happy. Congratulations in your new-ish role of AP. Um, yeah, you mentioned the tips and tricks. Those are some of the things I would call just very procedural instruction. And I know one of the things that I've talked about quite a bit when I've done math walks in schools with principals and assistant principals, coaches, and that kind of thing is procedures or tricks are okay, but not without connection to concepts. So conceptual understanding is the foundation. If you're going to use any procedures, we have to connect those to conceptual understanding as well. But thank you for sharing that.
Monica, we had another person actually put something in the chat. So
Yeah,
Rachel says our district and administrative teams do IPG walkthroughs in both ELA and math classrooms multiple times throughout the year. We use the data collected to identify consistencies or inconsistencies across classrooms and content and use it to build professional development for our teachers.
that's great. That's wonderful to hear, Rachel. And I'm wondering if that's a Rachel that I know. Is she a Project Impact sister, Rachel? Some of you may not know what I'm talking about.
She
Project
says
Impact.
yes.
Yes, I knew it. I knew it. She's a Project Impact sister. Okay, Project Impact was years and years, ages ago, but it was a math content learning sessions that we did for several years. Okay, so thank you for sharing, you guys. So let's start digging in now. So let's take a closer look at the components, and this is the way I like to just kind of give like an outline. If I'm going to outline what these components are on the math IPG, they all start, all of the IPGs start with culture of learning. Um, it is structured hierarchically such that the more foundational elements are generally come first. So culture of learning um, it doesn't underscore, but it underlies all of the other actions, core actions on the IPG. So you never really finish or disregard culture of learning. They're implied in all of the other core actions that proceed. So essentially, first you're checking to see if kids are actually doing what's being asked of them, and then check to see if what is being asked of them is grade level appropriate. Is the content or grade level appropriate in the lesson? The tasks, and you check this by looking at the tasks and seeing if they're appropriately challenging and standards aligned. And then finally, the big question is, are the students doing most of the thinking in class? So let's look at culture of learning. The culture indicators focus on this main question. Is there a classroom culture where student agency, mathematical identity, and belonging contribute to students' mathematical success? So I want to first, before we start looking at each of these indicators, first I want to call out that culture or environment and culture of learning should be viewed differently. So the culture of learning is specifically calling out the academic environment that not only prioritizes each student's learning experience, but also ensures that the time spent throughout the lesson is well organized and that the time is spent on in the most meaningful way to help all students stay engaged in the learning and be successful. So one of the things that I like to do whenever I'm walking to look for culture of learning is I like to think to myself, I'm a student in this classroom. Could I figuratively disappear? Could I hide? And if my answer to that is a resounding yes, then I know I need to look closely at at the indicators in here and find why is that the case? So the expectations here are really important. When you're engaged in learning walks and evaluating the culture of learning, it's important to ask if high expectations are expected of all students and if the culture of learning creates an environment where this is possible. Now, this is where teacher and student belief comes into play. And here's what I want to mention about student belief. That's belief in myself as a doer of mathematics. Does every student in the classroom believe that they have something valuable to contribute to the math class as a whole? That is what builds agency and mathematical identity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a timer for a minute, and I'm going to let you have a quiet moment to just read through each of those indicators and drop in the chat or come off mute and make any comments about things that are standing out to you or any questions that you have. Start the minute. All right, that gives us a minute. Was there anything that stood out to you that you'd like to call out for the whole group? know I've had a lot of people before ask me about my wait time is not the very best, but um, I've had a lot of people mention to me, how do you demonstrate a joy for learning? Or how do you see a joy for learning? That may be one of those things that you may not necessarily see a joy of the learning, but you can definitely see when there's not joy for learning in a classroom.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay, I was just going to say, as a former math teacher, I always would be positive, even if I was a little hesitant about the lesson. You want to be positive, because if you're positive, then it's going to build your class up, and they're
Yeah.
going to, and it's actively engaged. And I'm not just saying sitting there, answering a question or two. I mean, actively, like get them up, get them to the board, have them work a problem, have another student on the other side doing the same problem, but doing it differently. I mean, just getting them involved, because, kids, they just can explain a problem differently than, the
Yeah.
others.
Yeah.
And just having them actively, not just sitting there, like you said, you don't want a kid to be invisible,
Right.
or just say that they're not. Everybody, even though your low ones, they are so excited
Right.
when they get to go to the board and work a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Monica, there's
Thank you
actually
for, yeah.
there's a question in the chat too, and
Mhm.
so Drew, I'm gonna say it to her, but if you don't mind coming off mute and maybe give it a little more context. Drew says, "What do you look for as far as student choice?" So I think he's looking at that second indicator there.
Yeah, I was looking at the second indicator, and I think I'm just thinking, if they weren't planning on you coming, it feels like student choice would be more of an into toward the end of a unit, as far as lesson planning. Early as you're building that foundational knowledge, you feel like it would be a little bit more structured. So I'm just curious how you would look for student choice, as you're doing your learning walks and observing those teachers.
Okay. That's a really great question. So for in the case of in the culture of learning, student choice is going to be more like something like, I choose to solve a problem in this way, or I choose to use a specific mathematical tool to help me solve this problem. It doesn't necessarily mean like I choose to do problem number 1 and not problem number 14. Or it can also, but in the case of like choosing a problem to solve specifically, it could be that the teacher gives the students a choice of which of these problems do you want to solve. Not necessarily like, if you solve this one, you don't have to solve another one, but um, maybe just I can choose which problem I want to share out about. So that's more what student choice in culture of learning is going to be like. Choosing whether or not to engage is not, I mean, that would tell you something about the culture of learning, but that's not what we mean when we talk about student choice. We're talking more about like autonomy. Like, I don't have to solve a problem the same way everybody else is solving in my group. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And in math, that makes a lot of sense of allowing the choice of how to solve a problem. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for that question. And Jennifer, thank you for sharing. I always love to hear from, as a former math teacher. I'm sorry, let me, we're going to go on to core action 1. And this is the way I like to kind of frame out or outline core action 1. If you recall several years ago, when in the math education world, we rolled out with those 3 math instructional shifts: focus, coherence, and rigor. So if you look at core action 1A, B, and C, A is focus, standards focused, grade level content focused. B is coherence. Coherence is connections between the lesson is connecting between mathematical concepts, making connections between grade levels, making connections explicit among lessons and ideas. And then C is rigor. Is the lesson using the materials as designed to target the appropriate aspect of rigor? And those aspects of rigor are stated there in C. They are conceptual understanding. 2 is procedural skill and fluency. And the third aspect of rigor is application. So the other thing I want to make sure, and like this is a great little summarizer of core action 1, those 3 instructional shifts, and it also calls out the use of the materials, the use of the HQIM as the center of instruction in service of developing math ideas and rigorous instruction. I'm going to set the timer for a minute and let you just read through those 3 indicators and see if there's anything that stands out that you'd like to highlight or if you have any questions. I'll set the timer. All righty. Was that long enough? Do we have any questions or things that we want to highlight for the group?
I do, please. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure, please, in C, when it has the 3 conceptual understanding, procedural skill, and so forth, like all 3 of those don't have to be evident in one lesson. You identify which one you are trying to accomplish, and that would suffice for that particular one, right?
Absolutely. And we're going to look at that a little deeper on this next slide. And hopefully that'll make things crystal clear for as far as the aspect of rigor. Many of our standards in math have multiple aspects of rigor, and sometimes they'll have like all 3 are an aspect of rigor. You can't be doing all 3 at the same time, but they are in service of each other. Like if I am maybe I'm looking for procedural skill and fluency, but they're showing me their skill and fluency through an application task.
Right.
So some of them also, I'm not going to go any further just yet because I'm going to show you all something on the next screen that I think you'll find pretty helpful. One thing I do want to mention before we move on is, if you recall a couple of years ago when we were first doing math IPG walks in classrooms, and this was just after the rollout of the new HQIM. A common misstep that was happening at that time was we were walking in classrooms looking for core action 1 indicators and thrilled to death that the materials were out and on the desks. And that became an automatic yes for core action 1A, and even B, and sometimes even C. We just said, yes, yes, yes. We were wearing those rose-colored glasses and just saying, thank goodness the materials are out and being used. So I just want to make sure that consideration should be given to how the materials are being leveraged as designed. If you look in core action B and C, some of the language there is very intentional. So materials being used as designed to connect developing math ideas, materials being used as designed to intentionally target the aspect of rigor called for by the standard. So it's for this reason that it should be actually difficult to rate or score core action 1 without properly knowing or reviewing the HQIM. Otherwise, how do you know what as designed is? So I just want to make that very, I just wanted to highlight that for you. So I'm going to go on to this next slide, and this is where you're going to see those aspects of rigor. So there's this additional tool. I know today is about the IPG, but we can't talk about the IPG and standards without talking about the Tennessee Math Instructional Focus Documents, or we call them the IFDs. We love acronyms in education, don't we? So the IFDs serve as a great resource both for teachers and for school leaders in understanding the focus and intent of the Tennessee Math Standards. Now, you can find the IFDs on the Best for All Central website. You can search them by grade or course. But here's something I want to draw your attention to. And I think this is one of the things that Kelly was talking about. Every single standard in grades K through 12 in math have an instructional focus document. Now, there are two main parts to the instructional focus document. The first part is that second table that you see that has the level 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are evidence of student learning statements. The next main key thing to leverage in the IFDs is that very like paragraph looking statements down below. Those are the instructional focus statements. We've spent a lot of time to what does the evidence of learning look like for students at each of these levels? And that's where teachers typically, they want to know, as it pertains to my students today in my class, where do my students fall on this evidence of learning spectrum? But then they don't necessarily go in depth into the instructional focus statements. And I just want to point that out to you as instructional leaders in your buildings, that we should maybe start talking about those instructional focus statements because that's where a lot of the good feedback is going to come from. If you're walking in a classroom and there are things that you see that you want to give some really specific feedback to the teacher, you can find a lot of great feedback in these instructional focus statements. So reading those and looking over those and even going over some of that with the teacher after a walk could be a wonderful resource for you as an instructional leader. And then Kelly, her comment about the aspect of rigor. If you look right underneath the standard, there's that little table there that just has 3 spaces. Those are the 3 aspects of rigor. For this standard, this is standard 8 EEB5. This standard's aspect of rigor is 2 things: conceptual understanding and application. So that means I should see a lot of instruction that's based on conceptual understanding, getting students maybe getting in front of misunderstandings for students, connecting today's concept to prior concepts that they are. That's going to help me teach conceptually, teach the standard conceptually. And then there will also be some application. Now, let me tell you one little thing, and this is just a tidbit of one of the things I've done with this that's been very powerful in just a couple of instances. In one in particular school, we had kindergarten through 6th grade teachers come in, and they were asked to bring their instructional focus documents just for their grade level. Some of them brought the paper copies, some of them had access to them online. I asked them to go through and just count, how many standards do you have in your grade? How many standards are in your grade? And now if the standard had, this was the main standard, and then it had an A and a B and a C and a D, that standard was just counted once, okay? So count how many standards you have. That's your numerator. Now go back through those standards and count how many call for conceptual understanding as the aspect of rigor. That's your numerator. I'm sorry, that's your denominator. And here's what we discovered. In kindergarten, 23 of the 24 standards called for conceptual understanding. First grade, all 23 standards called for conceptual understanding. And I won't go through each and every one of those because it was it's not something that really makes a big impact if I just tell you about it. But if having teachers go through and create their fraction themselves is incredibly powerful, because the very next question that teachers as a whole had in that session that we did was, what does that mean for me? So I teach, let's see, I teach fourth grade. I teach fourth grade math, and 100%, all 28 of my standards call for conceptual understanding. How do I teach for conceptual understanding? Now you're getting to some really great opportunities to dig into the standards, dig into the materials, and discover what that means. Okay, sorry, that was just a little side note. So let me just show you where to find the instructional focus documents on Best for All Central. So again, you can go on here and you see how it shows you. You can search by grade level or in like K through 8 or secondary. What I like to do, hold on. What I like to do is, do you see down at the bottom where I've got it circled there? It's combined. Particularly if you are serving or supporting multiple grade levels, that combined one is very useful. And you can either bookmark that page or download them as you need them, so that when you're doing your walks, you're not having to search for them. You have it downloaded on your iPad or your laptop, whatever device you're using. But the good thing, or the cool thing about that combined one, is when you download that, and say you're in a classroom and you're not real sure what standard is being addressed in this lesson, you can do Control F and search for keywords, and it'll bring up the options of, like, you may be, these are the, it kind of gives you an idea of at least a fewer standards that you can search through. Is there anyone that would anyone like to share out a way that they've been using the instructional focus documents?
We've got an answer that's come through. It looks like, let's see, uh, collaboratives in PLC meetings. We would love for, you guys to come off mute and kind of elaborate more in how you use these documents collaboratively.
So for us in our PLC meetings, each week we do PLCs with grade level bands. And so right when we're having our PLCs, if we've had observations, we'll go over with the teacher or we'll go over in a group and saying, okay, here's your IFD. And in going through that, we'll discuss like what each one of these is actually looking for. What are the key words that
Mm,
need to be impressed upon? Because a lot of times those categories, there's very small line between a 1 and a 3, and it's really
yeah.
just a difference of a word or two. So when you break down what those 1 or 2 words are, then you can see, oh, this is what I didn't do. Or if you say like, if we know that the lessons are supposed to be more student led, and a lot of teachers aren't very comfortable with the student led part, you're not saying that the whole lesson needs to be student led, but you're saying that a percentage of the lesson needs to be student led. And what does that look like? That looks like the students are answering, they're guiding the questions, they're doing this, they're doing that. And then the teacher gets a better understanding of what's actually being asked of them when you go over those IFDs.
That's great. That's great. So that kind of shows you that sometimes I can be teaching a lesson that addresses this standard, but I'm really not addressing it at the level that it needs to be addressed.
All right, Rachel, you can unmute.
Rachel,
So the IFD for us has been integral in helping us answer those questions in Core Action 1. I obviously do not have all of my content teachers' curriculum memorized, and I don't know what aspect of rigor each piece or each part of the standard is supposed to address. And we have spent a lot of time on Core Action 1C specifically, talking about what aspect of rigor that we saw that was addressed in the lesson versus what they're actually targeting during their instruction in the classroom. And sometimes that's different. It might be conceptual understanding activity where they're actually in the instruction, we're seeing a lot of application being done. So we've spent a lot of time trying to differentiate and see if what we're actually seeing in the classroom is where that standard intended for them to be.
good. Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. All right, I'm going to move us on into Core Action 2. Core Action 2 is primarily dealing with teacher strategies. So as you read through Core Action 2, we want to hone in on the intentionality of the teacher moves around questions and tasks. With Core Action 2, we're looking at the instructional strategies that the teacher's using to support students' progress through the lesson mastery. Here's the big picture. With Core Action 2, you're looking to see if the teacher is using the materials and their practice, their craft, I like to call it, in a way that allows all students the opportunity to interact and explore mathematics, to do these things: connect to and make meaning of what they are learning. So making meaning of sounds a little vague. However, that's what learning is. Learning is us just making sense out of whatever it is we're encountering. So our students being given the opportunities to explore and make meaning of the content that they're learning. You also might see these, make note or highlight some of these words in that core action: variety, multiple, student work, adjustments. Those are also intentional words. This core action is chocked full of formative assessment moments that allows the teacher to know if the students are with them. If we look at indicator D, core action 2D, the emphasis here is on student work, questions, and discussions. So if you're looking for strong evidence in core action 2D, these are classrooms where the teachers are prompting the students to talk to one another about what they're learning. This not only allows the students to learn from one another, which was something we heard about earlier from the previous math teacher. They're learning from one another, but it also gives that teacher the opportunity to listen to what their students are saying and adjust the lesson accordingly. Those are these internal pauses. I'm going to listen, pause and listen, and now I'm going to make adjustments because I'm hearing majority of students are ready to move on, or I'm hearing a lot of misconceptions and they're asking each other lots of questions. If you want to know about core action 2 before you go into a classroom to do a walk, the teacher's edition will let you know how prepared that lesson is for core action 2, because you will see in the teacher margins those wraparound supports. I'm going to flag something here that you may or may not have noticed, but as a whole in the state, in prior work in doing the math IPG walks, one of the things we had noticed is, and I haven't collected any data on this since, but one of the things we did notice was that there were lots of instances where teachers were not using their teacher manual to prep lessons, but instead they were using the student edition. Here's the problem with that. Those wraparound supports that we were talking about, like those questions, the misunderstandings, common misunderstandings, questions to further thinking, questions to prompt student discourse, those are not going to be found in the student edition. Those are only in the teacher's edition. So that may be something that you kind of want to keep in your pocket and be on the lookout for. So here we are on to core action 3. And one of the things I wanted to make note of is an error on this slide itself. You'll notice to make this readable, we kind of had to big it up. We had to make it bigger so that you can read the text, and that made us lose some of those rating indicators on the right. So right now, all you're seeing is the yes and somewhat. You're not actually seeing the mostly and not yet, but they are still there. They're just not on this slide. Just wanted you to know that. So in core action 3, the focus is actually student practices. But I want you to make note of this. We're going to focus here on the inherent connection between the teacher moves and the subsequent impact those moves have on the students. So if you notice on A, B, C, D, and E, there are 2 sentences in each of those. The first sentence is the teacher, the teacher, the teacher. The second sentence starts with students are doing this, students are doing that. So there's that inherent connection about a teacher move that results in a student practice. At the heart of core action 3, we want to see that all students have the opportunity to do the mathematical thinking within the lesson, not just perform math. Not just perform, but actually do the thinking. I'm going to set the timer because there's a lot of information in core action 3. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to give you a minute because some of you have varied experience with this, but read over these and highlight anything that you feel like stands out that needs to be shared or any questions that you have. I'll start the timer. Okay. Anybody like to come off of mute and maybe share out what they highlighted, underlined, or made note of, or have any questions?
Well, I'll actually share something that was talked about in the, I believe it was Southeast session that I had yesterday. So while people are really thinking about, what they want to type or say, um, they really centered their discussion around when they got to this core action about struggle, and in particular the word productive
Yeah.
struggle. And because there was one administrator in particular that was saying that, um, he walks into a classroom, whether it's an IPG walk or an observation, and he's like, the teacher is so nervous about letting there be time to let them have that productive struggle because they're afraid it just turns into something that's unproductive, that it keeps them from almost doing it. And so they were like, and then at that point they said it's a very, very fine line of knowing when to start applying scaffolding things and applying supports and that sort of thing to then get things back on place to then get to a position of productive struggle. And so they really, really centered most of their focus there. But I think I just saw a hand up.
Our former math teacher, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is my big thing about productive struggle. So many teachers want to just tell them the answer. And you just got to almost sit on your hands because you can ask questions and guide their thinking, but they need that productive struggle. You can guide them, like if they're going away from the answer, if they talk to you about how they're working this problem, if you kind of guide their thinking back to the right and don't tell them the answer, that productive struggle will enable them to get the correct answer. And teachers need to, just like you said, it's really hard because it was hard for me as a math. I was like, just give it to me. Let me show you. And you can't. You have to have that productive struggle so if they get to the answer, they're going to be able to do it again. If you tell them the answer, they're probably not going to get it.
Right.
So
Very
that
good
was my
point.
big thing.
Yeah. I heard you say something about sit on your hands.
Yes.
There was an NCTM article that was really great that gave like ideas for how to help students with productive struggle. And one of the pieces of advice they said was leave your pencil at your desk or put your hands in your pockets. Even just pointing to certain things on the kids' papers or in the books or something like that can lead to unproductive struggle where you're just feeding them the information. That's also quicker. It's easier and it's quicker for us to just tell them, this is what you want. This is what I'm looking for. Do it this way. That's quicker and easier. However, if we remember, we want students to do the thinking. And what does it mean to even just learn? It's making sense of. If I need someone to make sense of something, I have to give them time to process some of their thoughts and the things that they've experienced so far.
And some of your lower ones, they take longer. They're going to get there,
Yeah.
but it's going to take longer, and you can guide their thinking. You still do not have to tell them the answer.
Right.
And that's what I always, I always love to see, that there are 2 or 3 different students that they got the same answer, but totally different ways. And I would let them explain their ways, and that helps others out, their peers.
Yes. Sharing, students sharing with each other. So that brings me to one of the big things that when I'm looking for this in a classroom, I'm listening for students to be talking, right? But I want to hear discussions going beyond just telling each other this is the answer I got. Did you get it too? Yes, I got it. Or, it has to go beyond just that. So here are some questions that you can kind of ask yourself as you're looking for indicators on this core action. One, the main question is, who's carrying the cognitive load in this classroom? Who's doing the most thinking? If I'm walking out of the classroom and saying, well, I know that the teacher knows the math really well. He or she showed me that the teacher knows the math really well. I was not able to see what the students knew or didn't know. I didn't hear them talking about that. Then that's a dead giveaway. That's one of the things that needs to be part of the feedback. Is there time provided for the students to grapple or struggle productively? And I also want to take a moment to say, because the next question is to ask yourself is, were the students engaged? But not just sitting forward, awake, not misbehaving. That's a behavioral engagement. We want to see that students are intellectually engaged. Even if that doesn't necessarily mean that we're all the students in the classroom are math scholars and solving big complex problems and stuff like that. But it does mean that you can see if students are thinking. That is something you can see. It's sometimes not evident exactly right away, but you can see if students are thinking or just waiting for the kid that they know is going to have the right answer to answer. Or waiting, if I wait long enough, the teacher's going to give me the answer. She's not going to let me sit here and struggle. If I wait long enough, again, can the student disappear? That goes right back to culture of learning. Okay. Is there anything else anybody would like to share about core action 3? All right. I'm going to move on. All right, so we have core action 4 here. Now, this is written in red type, right? Here's why. Core action 4 has been added to ELA, the knowledge building IPG, the one that's K through 12. Its focus is on instruction providing access to all students. The math does not have a core action 4. However, some districts across the state have started taking the liberty to go ahead and add a core action 4 to their math tool as well. So as you and your school, your team are ready, you may want to include core action 4 in your math walks. I'm just curious to know if any of you have had experience with core action 4 in the ELA world, and if you have thoughts about adding this to the math IPG.
And one thing as people are kind of, thinking about, if they have used it or something like that, I can say based on just the other sessions that I've
Yeah.
obviously had so far, um, there are a few districts that it looked like they have started using Core Action 4, but it actually looked like there were many that this was either the first year they've really been using
Yeah.
Core Action 4 or they just didn't have a lot of experience with it. And so, to everybody out there, if you're in that boat, you don't need to feel, negatively about that or anything like that. It's just I think you're all in this together kind of thing. And so it's a new part of the process. But there were many districts I can tell you from the ones I've had in East Tennessee so far, as well as the Mid Cumberland and the Upper Cumberland, that very, very few had been using Core Action 4. And it's also because I think that a lot of those districts their emphasis was on a different core action. And so obviously if
Yes.
that's the case, then, it's not that it's not important. It's more along the lines of, it's not the priority right now compared to, let's say, I don't know, this district in particular is focusing on core action 2 kind of
Yeah.
thing.
So I think too, like to speak more on that, Michael, is that like the ELA team, they have had an IPG for much longer than the math team has had. So they've had more time with it. Even though they're similar tools, they're not the same, and it's completely different content. So I think as a whole, we are still refining our practice of using the core actions 1, 2, and 3. So core action 4, kudos to you if you are trying to add that to your math IPG already. But there are opportunities within the core actions that we do have to think about things to look for all students having access. I'm not going to read each of these to you, and I know you're going to get these materials eventually, so I don't want to spend too much time on here, but this is a list of some things that you could look for. It is definitely not an exhaustive list. This is just some ideas of things to kind of get the ball rolling, get your brain cranking on what are some things, other things that I can look for that make sure that all students have access. It's also something, though, that I think we need to start thinking about in math, because we are supporting students with learning disabilities, English language learners, economically disadvantaged students. There's even a lot of research out there in math education about girls having access to mathematics. Do they have the same opportunities? Do girls have the same opportunities in math education as their male counterparts? Unfortunately, research shows us the answer to that is no. If we think about math as being part of the STEM pipeline, there are far too many opportunities for females to exit that STEM pipeline than there are for males. Why is that the case? There's a lot of different theories out there, and good ones out there for why that is the case and why that happens. However, I do also want to add that there are some really great research articles about how mathematics or STEM, the STEM fields, are one of the key ingredients for exiting the cycle of poverty. If you think about those careers, those jobs that make the most money, we know it ain't education. It's not necessarily those service fields. It's the STEM fields. So giving all of our students, economically disadvantaged ESL students, special education students, giving them really strong mathematics and science and technology, engineering opportunities helps get them out of or break that cycle of poverty. If anybody would like that article, one of those articles, I'll be happy to share it with you. Okay. So here's what we know. We know that great lessons are connected to solid lesson prep. So we call it lesson prep, unit prep, lesson internalization. I've heard it called different things, but the same principle is that it's not just a lesson plan, because my book gives me a lesson plan. This is intellectual preparation for implementing the lesson that I'm about to implement. So we're going to talk here. We just chose core action, this indicator from core action 2, to show as an example of how the IPG is connected to intellectual prep or collaborative prep. So let's read. I'm going to read this statement from core action 2. The teacher uses a variety of explanations, representations, tasks, examples, and/or instructional techniques to make the mathematics of the lesson explicit. So, what might collaborative prep that supports core action 2 in practice look like? I've given you a moment to think about that, and now I'm going to show you. So here's what that might look like. That might look like teachers doing some pre-work, meaning complete an initial read to kind of get the gist of the lesson, take a look at the models that are being highlighted in this particular lesson, and look at what strategies that students are going to be expected to use and what strategies might they use that are not part of the expectation. Then teachers would probably identify and articulate the purpose of the lesson, like what's the learning goal here. They may also want to complete the math tasks in the lesson. I'm not seeing as much of that happening as I would love to see, but I feel like teachers sometimes, like, they're the content specialist. They're like, what do you mean? You want me to teach third grade? You want me to do third grade math problems? Yeah, actually, I want you to do some of the third grade math problems, because doing those problems with the mindset of the students in your classroom may actually give you some insight to why particular problems are worded the way they're worded, why the curriculum chose particular numbers that they chose. It also may help you in doing those math tasks from a different student's perspective, could help you recognize, oh, there are multiple ways to solve this problem. I really wouldn't have thought of it this way. And then also analyze opportunities for student performance expectations in this lesson. So what would success look like for this lesson? Anticipate where your students may struggle and plan for supports for those students. Analyze opportunities for student discourse. That may look like me looking into the teacher margin for those wraparound supports. What questions am I going to ask to get students talking? And then, of course, prepare the materials that you're going to need for this lesson. Hopefully, for some of the lessons, it's going to be manipulatives, maybe chart paper, maybe thinking about how my students are going to be grouped for these particular tasks. So I can have those things ready before I deliver the actual lesson. I have an analogy that I like to use for this. In this case, prep. I heard someone else say all roads lead to good prep. Prepping for a lesson is kind of like prepping for a speech that you didn't write. If I was given a speech, I didn't write the speech, and I wasn't planning on even giving the speech. But someone tells me, hey, listen, I'm sick, I'm leaving, I need you to give the speech. Here are my note cards, here's the slides, here's the clicker, here's the the poster that you're going to refer to. This is your stage, your mic, blah, 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 blah. You're going to give this speech tomorrow. I'm not just going to walk up on that stage and start reading from slide 1 or card 1. That's not going to be the first time I look at that speech. I'm going to read through the notes that person who made the speech, I'm going to look through the notes they made. I'm going to read through the slides themselves. Let me look at this from my audience perspective. These are the slides they're going to see as I click through. Where's the animation for the slides? Which slides are animated and which ones aren't? What is going to be the expectation of my audience? What do they want from me? What's the main idea of this speech that I'm giving? And how am I going to make sure I don't want it to be boring? How am I going to engage them in a way that makes this more interesting for them and more meaningful for my audience? So I might change something up a little bit. I might add my own little 2 cents here and there. Here's an experience, an anecdotal something or another. That's my analogy for lesson prep. I just wanted to share that with you because I feel like it's a good way to think about it. Because, like, for instance, these slides, I didn't write these slides. These slides were given to us. I've done this session more than once, and I feel like I look back on the first session of this I ever did, which was last year. Feel like it's much more engaging now than it was the first time I gave it. If you were a former math teacher or teacher of any sort that was departmentalized, first period lesson, the same lesson that you've taught, and the last time you deliver that lesson is going to be better than the first. So, my 2 cents. So let's think about, did anybody want to say something?
Oh no, Monica, I was just gonna let you know we got about 10 minutes left.
10 minutes, and we are so close to done. I promise I'll be done in time for you to have some time. So before your walks, some ways that you want to use the IPG and the IFDs is to prepare you for those walks. So let's see. First of all, think about what are the things that you want to look for in this round of walks. You might look through the last round of walks to see, okay, we really need to focus in more on core action 1C, rigor. I'm going to get all of the indicators while I'm walking, but I'm going to pay particular attention to rigor because I know that's one of the things my teachers have been working on. But another big thing for you to do is make sure you're able to calibrate yourself around the materials themselves, the HQIM. If you can, if you have time to do this, or if you know which classrooms you're going to walk in, what lessons they're going to be teaching, maybe take a minute before you walk in to look at that lesson in the teacher's edition before you go in, because you might be able to see, oh, these are the things that I should be seeing students doing. So some high-level questions to put in your pocket before when you're prepping for some walks is, what might we expect to see or hear in the classroom environment during this lesson? Am I going to expect to see students sitting in small groups? Am I going to see a mixture, a variety of how students are grouped together. I should be able to hear students talking some in the classroom. I don't want to just see Sage on the stage, stand and deliver. In core action 1, you might ask what standards are being addressed. How are they described in the IFD? Are there any specific lesson components that we're targeting today? Maybe you're going to observe just the explore part of a lesson, or the share and solve and share portion of a lesson. Also in core action 2, you're going to maybe think about what specific teacher moves do I want to see happening in classrooms as I walk today? And how might we see students interacting with the materials and interacting with each other during these walks? So those are good things to think about if you're walking with a group. Talk to each other a little bit about that before you go into the walks. And then, of course, during the walks, you're going to want to take notes of observations, noticing questions that you might have about the lesson. I know there's not a lot of space. There's no space actually on the front side to take many notes. I like to draw pictures of things as I'm walking in classrooms, so that a lot of times gets done on the back side of my page. Some people are not a paper and pencil kind of person. I am a paper pencil gal, but you walk in with a technology and you're recording your things right then and there. But I want to just make mention of this thing that we call student work analysis that's actually part of lesson prep. If you are walking and in the moment see some example of a student work that you want to call out, maybe during feedback time, debrief, if you can take a picture of that, that would be fantastic. Or pick it up and ask if you can make a copy of it. That may also be something that you want to do during your walks. And then, of course, after your walks, when you're debriefing or giving feedback, consider what you learned. Talk about what trends that you saw, what trends influence the next steps in collaborative prep. And then also, of course, think about how does intellectual prep or lesson prep impact and drive high academic expectations for these core actions. This is just a list of how district leaders and school leaders can utilize the IPG, and of course teachers. And I'm not going to read all of those to you because you can see them. A lot of these have to do with prep and giving focused feedback and support for teachers. So the last slide here is kind of sharing links to where you can find some prep materials and the math standards resource page. And I want to remind you, if you're not already a part of it, the Math Implementation Network has registration, that if you would like to register for those things, you're welcome to reach out to me and I can get you in touch with the right people.